You wake up, and your breath fogs the air before your eyes are even open. The ground under you is cold stone, softened only by a bed of packed leaves. There is no blanket. There is no mattress. There is only the warmth of the person sleeping beside you and the dying orange glow of last night's fire. For a Neanderthal in Ice Age Europe, this was just Tuesday. For your body, dropped into that same cave 40,000 years ago, this would look closer to a medical emergency. So let's actually do it. Let's put your body through one day as a Neanderthal, using what the bones, the isotopes, and the teeth actually tell us. Not the grunting cartoon caveman, the real one. Before we get to the physical demands, it helps to know who we're actually talking about. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for roughly 300,000 years, disappearing from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago. That is not a footnote species. In some regions, it's longer than modern humans have occupied the same ground. Researcher Chris Stringer has spent much of his career pushing back against the old image of Neanderthals as a failed, slow-witted dead end. Genetic work, led by Svante Pääbo, which won a Nobel Prize, showed that many people alive today carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA inherited from interbreeding tens of thousands of years ago. Whatever they were not simple. And in a strange sense, they never fully left. Start with the cold, because the cold never stops being the first problem. Anthropologist William Steegman Jr. studied Neanderthal skeletons and found something striking. Their limbs are short relative to their trunks. Their chests are barrel-shaped. Their noses are wide and projecting. This is not random. It is the same pattern seen in cold-adapted human populations today, like some Arctic groups, where a compact body loses less heat to the air around it. Neanderthals were not hairy monsters. They were built like furnaces designed to hold their own heat in. Your body was not. Within an hour outside that cave, in an unheated European winter, you would already be shivering. In a way, your Neanderthal neighbors simply were not. It isn't just body shape either. Their nasal cavities were unusually large and complex, which some researchers, including anatomist Todd Ray, argue may have helped warm and humidify frigid air before it reached the lungs, protecting delicate tissue from repeated cold air damage. There's genuine scientific debate about exactly how much of this was a specific adaptation to cold versus a side effect of other traits. And it's worth saying that plainly, rather than pretending the science is fully settled. But taken together, the skeleton is telling a consistent story, a body shaped, generation after generation, by a climate that did not forgive carelessness. Then there's the food, and this is where the story gets genuinely surprising. For decades, popular science painted Neanderthals as opportunistic scavengers, picking at whatever they could find. Chemistry says otherwise. Researcher Hervé Boucherens and his colleagues have spent years measuring nitrogen isotopes in Neanderthal bone collagen, a method that tells you, in effect, what an animal or a person mostly ate over the last several years of their life. The nitrogen signatures from Neanderthal remains across Europe are startling. They sit as high as, or higher than, wolves and hyenas from the same landscape. That makes Neanderthals top-level carnivores, eating enormous amounts of meat, likely including fat-rich organs, on a scale closer to a wolf pack than to a modern forager. Researchers Karen Hardy and Amanda Henry have also found starch grains and plant residue stuck in Neanderthal dental plaque. So it wasn't meat, and only meat. But the core of the diet, according to the isotopes, was animal. Think about what that actually requires. No refrigeration, no grocery store shelf. Every one of those calories had to be tracked, killed, carried, and, in a cold climate with short growing seasons, often eaten fast before it spoiled. Fat, in particular, was not a luxury item the way it can feel today. It was survival currency, concentrated in bone marrow and organ tissue that groups seem to have gone out of their way to access, based on the heavy fracturing seen on animal long bones at Neanderthal sites. Skip the fat and organs, live on lean muscle meat alone in a cold enough climate, and a person can actually develop a serious nutritional problem, sometimes called rabbit starvation. Neanderthal butchery patterns suggest they understood, in a hands-on and hard-won way, exactly which parts of an animal they could not afford to leave behind. Here's what that meant for a single day. Physiologists Andrew Froley and Stephen Churchill modeled the caloric needs of a Neanderthal body, factoring in their muscle mass, their cold climate, and their physically demanding lives. Their estimate lands around 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. Some estimates run even higher. That is roughly double what a modern adult typically needs. Your body, built and fed for a world of thermostats and grocery stores, was never built to fuel a day like that, let alone find that many calories on foot with a wooden spear. And this wasn't a once-in-a-while push, like training for a single race. It was every day, for an entire lifetime, in every season, including the ones where prey was scarce and the cold was at its worst. Try skipping a single lunch today and notice how quickly your focus slips. Now imagine that gap running not for an afternoon, but for a stretch of bad weeks in the middle of an ice age winter, with no pantry to fall back on. So let's reconstruct the day itself. You wake, cold, and your first task isn't breakfast. It's the hide across your shoulders, which you chew at the edges to soften it, because Neanderthal front teeth show a very specific, very heavy pattern of wear and microfractures. Researchers David Freyer and Eric Trinkhaus have argued this came from using the mouth as a third hand, gripping and working hides and fibers day after day, year after year. Your modern jaw was not built for that job either. Sleep, before any of that, wasn't the 8 uninterrupted hours you're used to. There was no locked door and no white noise machine. A fire needed tending through the night, and a cave shared with a group meant shifting bodies, low voices, the sounds of a group listening, even half asleep, for anything moving outside. Some researchers who study modern small-scale societies living without electricity, like anthropologist Carol Worthman, have found that sleep in these settings tends to be lighter, more segmented, and more socially embedded than the isolated, artificially dark sleep most of us practice now. It's a reasonable, evidence-informed comparison for what Neanderthal nights may have involved, though it's an analogy, not a direct window into the Ice Age itself. Then comes the hunt, and this is the part that reframes everything you think you know about their lives. Neanderthals hunted large animals, like red deer, bison, and even mammoth, often at frighteningly close range, using heavy thrusting spears rather than the throwing weapons that came later with modern humans. Wooden spears recovered from sites like Schöningen in Germany, some designed for close quarters use. Back this up. Getting that close to an animal that size, with a wooden spear instead of a rifle, has a cost. Eric Trinkhaus compared skeletal trauma across Neanderthal populations to injury patterns in modern professional athletes, and the closest match he found wasn't football. It was rodeo, broken ribs, healed skull fractures, damage concentrated in the head, neck, and upper body. Exactly where you'd expect if your job was wrestling something enormous at close range, over and over, for your entire adult life. And this wasn't a silent effort. Analysis of a Neanderthal hyoid bone, the small structure in the throat tied to speech, recovered from Kibara Cave in Israel, closely resembles the modern human version. Researchers, including Stephen Rowe, have used engineering models on that hyoid to argue Neanderthals were very likely capable of speech in some form, not just grunts and gestures. A close-range hunt against an animal that outweighs you by 1,000 pounds isn't something you do alone or in silence. It's coordinated. Somebody calls the timing. Somebody signals the retreat. That takes shared language, or something functionally very close to it. This is the detail that gets me every time. Because if the injury rate was that brutal, you'd expect a world with no room for weakness. The evidence says the opposite. At Shanidar Cave in what is now Iraq, excavated originally by Ralph Selecki and later reanalyzed extensively by Eric Trinkhaus, archaeologists found the skeleton known as Shanidar I. This man had a withered, partially amputated arm, was likely blind in one eye, and showed serious healed trauma throughout his body. He lived for years, maybe decades, after those injuries. A one-armed, partially blind man does not survive years of Ice Age winters and mammoth hunts by himself. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone thought he was worth keeping around. At La Chapelle aux Saints in France, a Neanderthal skeleton shows advanced arthritis and severe tooth loss, healed long before death, meaning this individual was likely eating soft, prepared food fed to him by others for years. Researchers are still split on exactly how deliberate or emotionally rich this care was, and it's worth saying plainly that some of that debate is genuinely unresolved. Some scholars caution against reading too much modern sentiment into old bones, but the pattern across multiple sites, in multiple countries, over tens of thousands of years, is hard to explain away as coincidence. There's a darker thread in this same story, and honesty means including it. At Krapina in Croatia, hundreds of Neanderthal bone fragments show cut marks and breakage that some researchers have interpreted as evidence of cannibalism, possibly tied to ritual or to genuine desperation during famine. Other specialists argue the marks could reflect different, non-dietary practices, like secondary burial. That question remains genuinely open, and a responsible account doesn't pretend otherwise. It's a reminder that Ice Age life held both extremes, sometimes only a season apart from each other. A community willing to feed and shelter a disabled man for years, and elsewhere or elsewhen, a community pushed to its absolute limit. Now here's the twist, the one that should reframe the whole picture you're carrying around in your head. A species we've spent a century imagining as brutish, slow, and doomed, by comparison to us was, by the numbers, tougher than we are. More calories burned per day. More traumatic injuries survived per lifetime. A body engineered by cold and by risk to simply endure more than yours currently could. And yet, alongside all of that endurance, there is real, physical evidence of people caring for each other's most fragile members. Shell ornaments colored with pigment have been found at sites like Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, suggesting symbolic decoration, not just survival. Toughness and tenderness were not opposites in that cave. They were the same story. So what does a single day as a Neanderthal actually cost your modern body? Cold exposure your frame isn't shaped to resist. A caloric demand nearly double what you're used to eating, sourced entirely on foot. Teeth doing manual labor. A real chance of a close-range injury, with no hospital waiting on the other side of it. And, if you were the one who got hurt, a survival that depended entirely on whether the people around you decided you were still worth the extra food. That last part is the one that should sit with you, because it hasn't actually gone anywhere. You don't hunt mammoth with a spear anymore, and your house has a thermostat instead of a fire someone has to keep alive all night. But the thing that got a one-armed, half-blind man through winter after winter in an Ice Age cave is still, underneath everything else, the thing keeping you upright on your worst days. Think about the last time you were genuinely sick, or injured, or just worn down past the point of managing on your own. What actually got you through it wasn't a thermostat or a grocery delivery. It was someone showing up, a meal left at your door. A person willing to sit with you when sitting with you cost them something. Modern life has traded spears for schedules and caves for apartments. But the underlying arithmetic of survival hasn't changed nearly as much as it looks like it has. Somebody still has to decide you're worth the extra effort. 40,000 years disappeared between that cave and this room, and somehow the ending is still the same sentence. It was never really about the cold, or the calories, or the spear. It was about who was willing to stay.